As you're getting seated, I just want to welcome you all to this discussion of closed captioning. I'm Mike Wassenaar. I'm the President and CEO of the Alliance for Community Media. And I want to thank you all for choosing us rather than the fabulous city of Austin tour, which is going to be fabulous, but I really appreciate you guys being here because it's a very important discussion. We want to give you some vital information that you need to know about rules regarding particularly PEG and closed captioning. But then also give you some other sort of frameworks for thinking about government service and captioning, and then give you some perspectives of actual captioning practice as we talk with a provider of captioning services here in the Texas area, and then we also talk with a PEG channel that has incorporated captioning into their production process, and we'll give you some insights into terms of what that has meant on a practical basis. So that's the goal of the course of the next hour and 15 minutes or so. We know that there's going to be the Google Fiber event later today. We will be done at a hard stop at 5:30, so you can make your way toward the buses. So I'm going to be mindful of time. And then we'll have time for questions at the end of the discussion. The other thing I want to ask you before we begin is please turn off your phones so that we can all have the conversation together. So let me introduce our panelists today and kind of lay things out for you. To my immediate left is Mitsuko Herrera, who is the Planning, Policy, and Special Projects Director for Montgomery County, Maryland's Department of Technology Services. To her immediate left is Terry McGinty, who is the owner of Texas Closed Captioning, based here in Austin, Texas, and who has been a live captioner since 1990. So she knows a lot about the captioning business and will give you some insights about the work of live captioning. And to Terry's immediate left is Dennis Dutra. And Dennis is the chief engineer with the city cable office of the city of Boston and with Boston Neighborhood Network. So he has some practical information about how captioning works within the PEG environment. And then for the course of the conversation, we're going to start things off with Mitsuko. I'll have some discussion about the second report in order on captioning, which apparently is causing a little bit of concern right now. I actually just got an email from one of my members in Wisconsin who got an unsolicited email this afternoon from a company, an unknown company that's based in Western Virginia, that said, "Oh, I just want to send you this unsolicited, please excuse my unsolicited email, but I understand that you are a PEG provider, and you should know about the FCC ruling, which goes into effect tomorrow. And I just wanted to let you know that your responsibilities were changing." This is a false advertisement that's actually going out to our industry right now. So I'm dealing with this issue with my members across the country as we speak. So if I'm working the phones here, you know why. But we'll talk a little bit about the second report in order. And then we'll go to Terry for some perspective about live captioning, and then to Dennis. So with that, I'm going to hand the flipper over to Mitsuko, and then for the sake of disclosure, I think you should all know that she's my fiancée. So I just want to make sure you know that. So, yeah. Not necessary, but I believe in transparency, and yeah. So, all right.
So in your house, do you call it a clicker or a flipper? Okay. So what I want to ask is, it's actually a picture of the pioneering woman in front of the state capitol, so I thought it was a good little image. I just want to make a disclosure that I am not a lawyer for you. I am not giving you legal advice, and it is not a substitute for you actually seeking legal advice. So when you look at why we want to caption, the first thing actually that I thought would be good is, since it's the afternoon, is I'm going to ask everybody here if you will just all stand up. So just stand up, stretch a minute. So what I want to ask is, good stretch. All right, so first thing I want to ask is, for anybody in here who receives funding from the federal government, whether you have school programs, you get block funding for your federal highway grants, any kinds of things, if you get any federal money, you should sit. For any of you who are a part of a state or local government, you can sit. And for anybody who is a business or nonprofit that serves the public, and anyone who creates English or Spanish language cable programs can sit. So we have one person who may not be subject to any closed captioning requirements.
Who? Pleased to meet you. Yeah.
Okay, now let me ask you, if you have channel revenues of less than $3 million per channel, please stand. If you calculated that your closed captioning expenses may exceed 2% of your total revenues, stand. And if you think you have an elected official or department head who would certify that, it's certifiable, yes,
Yeah.
that providing the cost of providing closed caption would be an undue burden in light of the size of your government, go ahead and stand. So for everybody standing, there may be an exemption to the closed captioning requirement that you may qualify for. Okay, so everybody can stand. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go through these and skip over some. The slides are all going to be available after the presentation, so I put a lot more detail and citations in there. So if you wanted it, you'd have it, but I am not intending to read them. So the first thing I want to talk about is why to close caption and how that can be effective communication. Older adults with hearing-related losses are the biggest growing group of people who use captions. People for whom English was not their first language find captions to be very helpful, and the deaf and hard of hearing community. You can be required, as I mentioned in there, the 3 different types of groups, and we're going to go through that. I want to point out to you one captioning case study to make this easier. I just took some screenshots, but those of you who might recognize that's a Granicus environment. This was a standard public hearing that we held about the Glenmont sector plan, and there was a particular group of folks in the community who speak primarily Spanish. So what Council Member Navarro organized with Derek Kenny and Donna Keating, who are in here, is that we had this group on the third panel, you'll see there is a group of panelists who spoke entirely in Spanish at the meeting, and on the monitors in the meeting, closed captions in English appeared, which provided a real-time translation, and it meant that you did not have to have it said in Spanish, it's translated to English, the council member asked the question in English, it's translated back to Spanish, and so forth. So I just want to let you know that there are some creative things as well that you can do. Also, your closed captioning is text searchable, so when you put that in, it becomes another way to find your content as well. So the key things we'll start with are the 2 federal ones, which I think actually apply to more people than the FCC rules. So here, the Rehabilitation Act, the primary thing it was really focused on was education, but it kind of covers everybody, and it's who gets federal funding, and the idea was that you wanted to have a kind of equal opportunity to access these benefits and services, and the important thing for most people in here is that the ADA requires that you communicate effectively with people who have disabilities. So the goal is to ensure that the communication that you're having is as effective with people who have disabilities. Primarily, you are responsible for providing and making those communications effective. The law sets forth lots of different ways that you could do it. Closed captioning is typically the way that people would make video communications accessible. You could do things also of having an interpreter. In a live meeting where you do things and you say if you want an interpreter, you should please make the request 3 days in advance or so forth. You can do those kinds of things. But generally, when you're televising these things or you're putting them in a later format, if you wanted to have somebody who is signing in the video, you could, or most people what they'll use are closed or open captions. The ADA provides that there are exemptions if it is an undue financial burden. They are not going to look, particularly anybody who works for local government, they will most likely look at the size of your whole government, not the amount of money that your government gives to support you as a channel. And in light of that, you're going to have a high-level official or some kind of department head who would make that claim that it's an undue burden. And that last part is also just telling you for businesses and nonprofits that in general, they're going to take a look at the whole thing. So what this also does is it prevents things where you have something like a Comcast or an NBC, and then they've created this small little channel. They're going to look at it not just in the size of that little channel, but in their whole corporate entity. The other things that are going to be primarily important for you are the FCC rules. Interestingly enough, I actually looked at this today. There was no closed captioning requirements or accessibility requirements in the Communications Act of 1934, but they did expand them as the other statutes here, and these are kind of the other sites. The 21st Century Communications Act, or Video Accessibility Act, I'm not going to go into too much, but basically what that meant is all the requirements that occurred, that existed in the cable and broadcast environment when you shift to having those things streamed in the internet or it's an IP signal, that they basically also apply there. The closed captioning rules, these are basically just the definitions, and I just stuck those in there with a citation, so if you want to take a look at those, you can. Basically what the rules say is that if you provide English or Spanish programming, you have an obligation to caption it. Except if you meet an exemption. But that's basically what they're looking to do. When you caption it, the cable operator has to pass through those captions for you. You can use open captions, subtitles, as opposed to just closed captioning, and as I mentioned about the CVAA. The exemptions we'll get into this economically burdensome. There are some exemptions if you're doing programs and they are not in English and Spanish, there's a little bit more wiggle room in that area. And you can kind of see some of the little itty-bitty things that you stick in there don't always necessarily have to be closed captioned. Although I will tell you that I work with a lot of disability groups, and some of the things that started this was I really want to know what that commercial was telling me. So there is an interest. There are some people, for the most part, if you're putting background music on, when you have text, you typically don't have to show the lyrics to those songs. But there are some people who would argue that I'd like to sing along with you, and I would appreciate it if you would. The other things, the window there is actually an exemption for new networks, which as a member of the CAC, or the FCC CAC, I'm working to repeal. Because actually what it meant was that there was a Spanish language NBC station that did sports that didn't do it because they claimed that they were a new station. It's like, you're part of NBC, really? So the economically burdensome, this is where the statutory requirements are. Generally, what they would look at for that is it in excess of 2% of your gross revenues on your channels? This, for those of you who may have multiple channels, the way the rule should work is if you have 3 channels, they each would have revenue of $3 million in order to make that. So for a lot of small stations, you may qualify that we are below that threshold. But again, what I would hope that people look at that as a way of like, well, let's try to roll out captions for certain programs, and then over time we'll build the budget for it. And ideally what you're looking for are people to not try to find these exceptions, but find ways also, I think, for some of this stuff is for you to be able to go to your city or your county and say, look, we have a requirement. The DOJ has really been actively looking to see, do we have doors that are accessible? Do we have all those kinds of padding and those kinds of things? And so you really want to sort of focus on those. These are sort of things about how you may calculate the economic burden for it, as I mentioned about each channel individually. The procedure, one thing I do want to point out here actually in the next one is that it will be placed on public notice. So it's a matter that if you're going to claim that you can't, that's going to move forward with the FCC. And a summary of it is that really you want to know is, are you exempt from the closed captioning rules? Do you have any obligations under the ADA to close caption? Do you have an obligation under Section 504? Those are some citations or some places we can get some more information. And I just want to thank you for having me here and for having it in Austin.
Wow, 5 minutes to spare. Wow, amazing. So, and that's some pictures of Austin being weird, so that's a great thing. So let me talk a little bit about the second report in order on closed captioning, which goes into effect tomorrow, as that deceptive email told one of my members in Wisconsin a little bit earlier today. That's some of my contact information if you want more information about this, or if you want to talk with me later on. So if you want to find the general FCC requirements for captioning, that's the link that you can find on the FCC's website. You can just simply also Google closed captioning FCC video programming, and they'll have a nice single-page compendium of their rules with the FCC. As Mitzi stated a few moments ago, according to statute, PEG channels are exempt from FCC requirements if the channel receives less than $3 million in revenue, or if the captioning cost would exceed 2% of the channel's revenue. The second report in order came out earlier this year. I've got a link to the report if you want to take a look at it specifically. It described in some detail ways in which video program owners and video program channels have responsibilities for captioning if they are not exempt from those rules. But it stated that all channels throughout the United States that are on a multi-channel video environment have to go into a reporting system so that consumer complaints about captioning can be handled appropriately. What happens right now is that if a consumer is not happy with the lack of captioning or problems with quality of captioning on a channel, as Terry might be talking about in a little bit, they can complain to the cable operator, or they can complain to the FCC. But if there's no point of contact for the point of origin for the video programming, the complaint just sort of goes nowhere. So what the FCC is doing is they're setting up a reporting system for all channels to be able to have points of contact for any consumer complaints. And this is actually, I think, useful for most PEG channels because this actually lets you know about people in your community who are interested in services or who want to find out more about your services or, frankly, want to use your services. It's actually a very good thing. What will end up happening as a result of the order is that the FCC will ask every channel in America to self-certify whether or not they're exempt or not. That you'll do it online with a web form that they'll provide, and that you'll do it once a year by a July 1st deadline. So for all the people who are operating channels here in this room who are probably exempt, you will have to go through that registration process, show a point of contact for consumer complaints, and then say whether or not you are exempt. Okay? And then you would get a record of complaints that go either to the cable operator or to the FCC in your area, which is actually a very valuable thing, I think, in some respects. All channels and all channels on the cable systems, not just PEG channels, will need to register. The web form is being built right now. So even though the order is taking place right now, there will be a subsequent release of information about the web form probably later this year, but it might be conceivably early next year. So when the web form is ready for public use for all of you and for every other channel around the United States, the FCC will issue a notice regarding the release of that web form. But you should expect that the deadline for the first certification takes place by July 1st, 2017. And then we'll be assisting all stations across the United States, whether or not you're an ACM member or not. We'll be working in partnership with NATOA on this issue. And we want to make sure that your colleagues in your communities know this, because I know that many people maybe know about things that are going on in NATOA or ACM because of you. So please be sure to tell your colleagues about this information. The thing that I'm finding is that there's a lot of misinformation that's being spread about this because of fear or anxiety that people may have about this. A couple other things you should know about the report and order. The order assigns registration responsibility as well to video owners. So anyone who produces programming in the United States has to have a point of contact listed with the FCC. And that's great if you're like the Discovery Network and you're doing Shark Week, right? It's just great, it's easy. But let's say you're a Cub Scout troop here in Austin, Texas, and you show up once a year for a video camp and you produce video programming that comes on the public access channel. Suddenly, the Cub Scout troop has to register with the federal government. Every public access producer in America would have to register with the federal government if this act was actually instated. So we contacted the FCC earlier this year. We said, hey, we looked at the order. Maybe you didn't consider this, but it might not be a good thing to have like hundreds of thousands of public access users in America jamming your system with useless information. And maybe it's going to be an untenable thing for facilities across the United States to have to manage. And they agreed with us. So the Disability Rights Office actually talked with us about forming a petition to waive the requirement. So just this last month, we filed a petition to waive the requirement for certification and registration for producers who distribute programs on exempt channels, which we think is a good thing and the FCC thinks is a good thing, because that way you actually have a usable record that can be searched for consumer complaints. So I'm happy to talk about that a little bit in the Q&A. So that's just kind of the second report in order, just in a nutshell. And with that, I'm going to cede the majority of my time to Terry. Terry, let me turn this over with you and to you, and you can talk a little bit about live captioning.
Do I need to do anything, or is that on? Aha. Can y'all hear me all right? All right. So this is my company, Texas Closed Captioning, and I've been captioning since 1990. And when I started, there were about 30 or 35 of us in the world that were captioning. So it's a pretty new field. And I don't know how familiar you are with what happens with live captioning. Does anybody know who's behind the curtain and what they're doing? A little bit? Okay, well, good, because this is very basic. So, whoops. Let me go back here. You would think that to be on a broadcast television station, you would need some sort of certification to be a captioner, just like interpreters have certifications for what different type of jobs they can do, but there is no certification required for captioning at this point. So quality is quite a issue in the field. My firm, you have to be at least CRC, and that is at 180 words a minute and 95% accuracy. So how fast do you think, for instance, Mike talks? Any guess? I'm guessing around 300. And I think you probably talk around 225. That's my guess. So this is pretty bad. It's a very entry-level captioner. And they say that most people talk at 200 words a minute, and at 95% accuracy, that's 50 errors in 5 minutes. So you can imagine if you're trying to rely on captioning for your information, that's a lot of important information missing. I look for people who are registered merit reporters, which is the highest certification that you can get, and we're certified by the National Court Reporters Association. Excuse me. Most captioners are court reporters who have gone on to get further certifications. There are also voice writers that use voice recognition to caption. I don't know much about that. I don't know if you all do.
It's a relatively new process.
Right.
Sometimes people also talk about it as shadow speaking, where
Right.
where you have
Yeah.
people who are using a little
Right.
handheld device.
Right. And I've seen it at about 80% accuracy, and I've seen one time when it was very good, and when I asked afterwards, it was a demo, when I asked afterwards how often they had done that same demo, it had been hundreds of times. So it's hard to tell how they would do if it was a, newscast or city council meeting. Well, that's kind of hard to read, but this is the flow of what happens on my side of the encoder. And it's missing me, but I'm sitting there at the steno machine, and I'm getting my sound either through, there's some encoders that actually send me back the sound, or you can listen through a just regular telephone line. So I'm writing on my steno machine. It goes into my computer. My computer has a dictionary in it that has all of the steno strokes that I know that are matched to a word in English, and that word pops out onto the television. And I have 0.6 seconds to correct it after I hit it, and then it's out. So that's maybe the stressful part of this job. And then you have two options from getting from my laptop to the encoder. And the old way, and the way that a lot of people still do it, is with a modem. And it has to send it at 1200 baud. So you can imagine how difficult it is to find the equipment to send 1200 baud. So most people are switching over to a TCP/IP connection with the encoder, which is not difficult to do, but it brings up some security issues for some television stations. So the encoder that I'm most familiar with is an EEG ICAP, and it's got the software that puts it online, sends me the sound, and I've got some pictures of what my screen looks like when I'm using that.
And there's different standards.
Yeah.
And there's different standards too. So EEG uses ICAP.
Right.
And when I started looking into it, I looked at my encoder's manufacturer, and they said, "Well, we don't do ICAP. That's EEG. You have to use our type of IP
Right.
caption." So then your caption has to be able to support it.
Right. And this is just kind of a close-up of what a steno machine looks like, because people constantly ask me why there aren't any letters on my keys. And those are the actual letters, but if you ever asked me to name them, I wouldn't even know what they were, because I'm not used to thinking of them as letters. You use them as sounds, And the reason you can write so fast is because you're combining a bunch of keys at the same time, and you're not typing, you're stroking. So if I wanted to write, like I work for the City of Austin, if I wanted to write City of Austin Channel 6, I could do that in one stroke, and that would pop out.
What would you hit?
I would hit STAUSZ.
So it's like an organ.
Yeah.
So you're doing chords, really.
Right.
You're doing like
Yeah.
it's like doing
Not
chords on an
notes.
organ.
And
Yeah.
so,
All right.
and our keyboard is supposed to be set up phonetically so that most of the sounds in the English language start with an ST. I don't know if that's really true, but, right, so. And here's what notes would look like if you saw my steno notes. So that's kind of telling you like that praf at the top is a new paragraph. And then TH means this, and that is an IS, but the letters are combined to make it. So that doesn't have any like big brief forms in it, but that's kind of gives you an idea of what that sort of thing looks like. And then, oh, the color is terrible in this. This is what my computer screen looks like when I'm captioning, and this is using iCap software. And I love this software, but I'm not trying to sell it or anything, but it's like super easy for us. And you can see, like, I don't have my glasses on, just a second. So on the right-hand side, that rectangle that's gray is the iCap software. And so on the left-hand side is the software for my captioning software, which I use Eclipse. And the very far left, the little words in the bottom left, Austin City Council work session, is something that I've just written. The kind of purpley block that tells you where the position is, that's my TV simulator that shows me where it's showing up on the television. So I can move the captions around with just a stroke on my steno machine and pop it to the top or the bottom or the middle. So I monitor what's going on because I'm in Austin, so I can watch the television station, but they also have a webcast. So no matter where in the country your captioner is, they should hopefully be watching something so that they know if their captions are blocking something important on the screen. And then like we have teams of captioners, and at my firm, we don't work for over an hour at a time because your quality goes very low. So you can see like Melinda started out and then Polly did. Somebody says, thank you, and then I got on to just do a little demo. And then the other thing I get asked most often is, why are people making mistakes on the air? So part of it is you're trying to remember your 200,000 words that are in your matching dictionary and hitting the right stroke. Part of it is you forget, and part of it is you maybe like slid a finger over and accidentally shadowed something and it pressed the key and made this word. So I did this at a UT football game. We captioned up on a giant Jumbotron, and I have a stroke for Obi-Wan Kenobi that is this OEB. And I was trying to write Chris Obaganaya's name, and I hit my Obi-Wan Kenobi name. So it came out on the big Jumbotron that Obi-Wan Kenobi had made a tackle or something. So
Obi-Wan Kenobi often.
no, and I don't even know why it's in there. I mean, like I must have done some news show about Star Wars or something. Or is that Star Trek? Star Wars, yeah. So this is just to show you my fingering for like OEBP would be my Obaganaya. And I just hit that little P in addition to the B with my middle finger. So it would have, I just kind of misfingered it. So that kind of shows you why people are, why you see stuff that makes absolutely no sense go out on the air. And you know, sometimes you can catch it before it pops out and sometimes you can't. And this is something that became very popular and was on Fox News and everywhere else. And I don't know who this captioner is, and I actually watched more for captioning, and it was very poor quality. But apparently everybody has started calling him the Penguin Boy now too. So I don't, but that was her misfingering something. But I've asked some of my friends to try to figure out what she was trying to write, and none of us could get it
That's
at all.
gotta be, yeah, Eli Manning, right?
Yeah. And so, but I can't figure out with my fingering how you could have come up with Penguin Boy. That would be, she might have had that in her dictionary for some reason and not. And then the quality regulations, I had just copied that on there because it's very namby-pamby, and I don't know how anybody is going to control the quality for live captioning. You know, it's going to all be consumer-driven, right? I mean, I would think. And I would just say if your company is looking for captioners, you know, the company that you hire, they should give you like web streams and different places where they are captioning, and you can go online and watch them, or have them send you tapes. But if they send you, you know, a recording, it could be of somebody on a really good day. So I would just look at them and then ask what kind of certifications they have, ask them to send you proof of the certifications. I think that's a good idea.
Terry, if you were to compare the quality or accuracy of the work that a live captioner does as compared to machine translation, could you give people a sense of what the difference is between a live captioner done by a human and like a machine translation, what that really looks like?
I don't know what a machine translation
Automated captioning.
like voice recognition
Yeah,
captioning?
yeah.
It's anecdotal because I've only seen, I saw a claim recently that said that the voice recognition captioning was at 99% now. I have never seen anything close to that, except for when they were doing something over and over. So I think it's around 80%, but I wouldn't swear to that. So that's actually the end of my slides.
Fair
It was
enough.
fast.
Thank you, Terry. Dennis, can you tell us a little bit about captioning work on the ground in Boston?
Sure. Can I do it from there?
Yeah, please.
Hello? Okay. So I'm going to talk about some of the technical aspects of it and how it works. And we're going to go over how it works, some workflow considerations, cost of hardware, and some of the things we learned as we started doing it. We started implementing captions maybe 3 years ago, maybe or so, and it was all new at that time. So this is similar to Terry's slide, but this, whoops, back. Here we go. So this is where Terry talked about how captioning works, and this is just an overview of how captioning works. So you have live captioning. We have a live video. It comes into an encoder, and as Terry said, I'll go through this fast. Audio is sent down to her. She does all the stuff she does, and she sends data back to our encoder. Oh, so I should be doing this. Audio goes down to her. Data comes from the captioner into our encoder. Video goes into the encoder, and now all the video that's coming out of encoder is captioned. So it has what they call embedded captions, 608 or 708 captions. And from that point, you send it out to distribution. When a TV or a browser is tuned to your channel, it has the ability to look for the caption data. Once found, the viewer has the option to display it on the screen or not. So that's a really basic captioning workflow. And this is ours, which is very similar. This is our workflow where we have, we have live video, we have a local recording, which is important, a captioning workflow, and then we send closed captions to our Comcast, RCN, Verizon. We have a closed caption monitor, which is important. It's a display that lets us see the captions, and we have a master file recorder. And then down here, what we do, because it's almost, I think it's a little beyond the scope of this, but the whole thing about web captions, there's so many ways to do it. It's such a big thing, you know, just how to do it. What we did was we first implemented captions on the channel, then we said, oh, yeah, we have to do it on the web too. And we came up with this plan to just do open captions on the web. So all this video past our encoder has captions embedded on it. We send it to what's called an open caption encoder, which is actually burning the captions on the screen, much like when you view your television at home. And that's the video we send to our web destinations, YouTube, our internal server, and we make a backup recording of that. So the one thing that I want to impress in this, which is something that we keep running into, is that, so this is our master control, and this is a controlled environment. It's our building. We send all our video to our master control. Everything before our master control, before our encoder, doesn't contain captions. So this local recorder we have over at the City Hall, and we're across the street, there's no captions there. So this is again, this is our regular workflow. And then this is an example which something that came up a few weeks ago for us. The city council says, we want to do a meeting that you usually caption, and we're going to do it at the new building. It's going to be a meeting that's going to require captions. So all of a sudden, we don't have this connection between our live video and our caption encoder. So what happens is everything here has no captions, and everything over here has no captions. So this is just an example of what always is happening with captioning is you have a workflow, you figure it out, and everything is good, and then you change it a little, or somebody wants to do something, and all of a sudden, your captions fall apart, and you have to keep checking it. And this is where usually somebody says, well, my kids stream on YouTube with their phone, and, why can't you guys do it? And you have to explain because, you have to move the caption, you have to get the video to the encoder. So you still can do it. In this example, I just show how, we move the caption encoder over to another location, and now everything at this location, our web stream, our local displays, our recordings, they all have captions. So in this case, it's using old phone lines, and at a remote location, you're more likely to need IP, because you might not be able to get phone lines in place when you are scrambling to get this last-minute request. So and that's about it. So
For the data connection, you're typically using an IP connection.
We're still using phone lines, because that's what we kind of started with, but we're starting to explore using IP. And in this case, the reason I showed IP is because, you can see if you're over at some new building, it's unlikely you're going to get a couple old analog phone lines installed. So that's where you're going to almost need to do IP. And the thing about IP, like we were talking with Terry, is that
Internet protocol.
IP.
As opposed to plain old telephone system.
Yeah. So that's a good question though. So this is a typical system, and this is more popular, I guess, earlier. But this closed caption encoder, it's sending its audio over what they call a POTS line, or a plain old telephone line, right? And then the data is coming from the captioner. Data is coming from the captioner on a phone line going into the encoder. So you have to call Verizon or whoever your local supplier is. I need 2 phone lines, and you have to hook them up, and then you give those phone numbers to the captioners. And what's getting a lot more popular is over IP, or an internet protocol. So in this case, you have an Ethernet jack that plugs into your encoder, and you configure it, and now the captioner gets their audio over an internet connection, and they send their data back to you over an internet connection. So.
And I would add on that we, as a cost savings measure, we used to have captioners, and they used an 800 toll-free number, which was buku dollars. And once we were able to get once we were able to get the IP, it meant that we eliminated, it was either $10,000 or $20,000 worth of telephone costs. What we also did is we have the captioners when we have live meetings and work sessions, but for our recorded programs, we have an appointment. So some of the programs are 15 to 30 minutes, and we have a sort of ingest, and then on Friday mornings, they play them, and the captioners are there, and they are captioning them, and then you come out of there with all of our programs have closed captions, but because we've sort of put all those hours together, it helped us reduce cost as well, because then you're sort of not buying a minimum time in the setup and all of that. You're kind of making that more efficient.
We've had to do, so part of this workflow, is we have to schedule with the caption center to have the captions done. And there's been times where something will go wrong, or they can't connect to the phone line, or somebody messes up and they don't schedule it. So what and like we were talking about earlier, Terry and I, is post captions are real expensive. I mean, I've had prices, we're paying $100 something an hour, and post can be $300 and $400 an hour for post. So what we do is we schedule it and set up like as if it's a live meeting, just like you're talking about, and then we just have it captioned real time again, and that works out well.
Yeah, and mostly what we've seen in the contract is the difference between what Terry mentioned is the quality of captions based on somebody doing it live versus perfect. And perfect costs a lot more.
It takes about 3 to 4 times the amount of time of the video. So if you give somebody an hour video, it's going to take probably 3 to 4 hours to do the post-production. So, yeah.
This is, excuse me, this is a slide about the cost. You know, hardware can be expensive, but fortunately we don't need a lot of it. Caption hardware is usually low maintenance. You configure it and you forget it. Average hardware costs are between, say, $1,000 for single channel analog standard definition to around maybe $18,000, what I found for some of our systems. It's good to consider purchasing a closed caption encoder when you build out a new system if you can. So one of the main, really the most important piece is your closed caption encoder, and that's the most expensive piece. So if you have a big project and you can roll in an encoder into the project, like a new room's being built out that you might do meetings, you know, you might see if you could, you know, roll that into the project so you already have captions there. Because one of the slides coming up talks about if you do 2 meetings at once, you need to have 2 encoders. So you have to keep adding them. And don't forget about phone lines if you're not using an IP-based system.
Can I ask a
Yes.
dumb question? So if we have backhaul from our remote locations provided on fiber,
Mm-hmm.
can that same backhaul be used for the closed captioning signal, or would we need more capacity?
Well, you'd have to locate the encoder over the fiber. So, excuse me, like in this case, if you have a meeting room and you have, this is fiber, this is our city hall and fiber back to our office, you could locate the encoder over there. I think I'm missing the question. So,
I'm just thinking about whether we need more backhaul capacity from our cable operator than what we're getting now.
The amount of data that's involved here is nominal. It's very, very minimal. So it's not going to change the capacity that you need. The additional question really is where in the workflow the insertion happens. If it happens at the remote point that Dennis is talking about, or in somewhere downstream within the facility locally, and then it's just kind of how your shop is configured for switching remote feeds. It's probably in your case, it was more efficient for you to be bringing the encoder to the remote site because of the way switching works.
it depends. Most of them we do switching. A lot of our systems we do switching over here at the city hall and send the video over here because we do switching at multiple different places.
Right.
So we just send the video here, and this is a nice, comfortable environment where the caption encoder never changes. We know the phone lines are always there. But as far as, yeah.
So it may be a capital cost that you're looking at for those remote sites if you're looking to go down this road, Jody, but it may not be like a data capacity bandwidth
Yeah, it's
cost.
not a lot, right.
Translating.
Where were we? Let's see. Cost. So this is just an illustration of, you know, where some of these costs are going. And like I said, the encoder is really your biggest cost. You know, if you, I guess there's less and less, but if you're doing, say, standard definition analog meeting room, you know, you can get an encoder for that environment for about $1,000. Whereas an HD, SDI, you know, digital environment, it's costing more like $4,000, $5,000. Then if you need 2 channels, maybe you need to do standard def and high def, or you might have a workflow that you need both. Then you need a dual channel encoder, and that's more like $8,000, $9,000. And this is our open caption encoder, which, you know, we may lose because there's new advancements that are going to make the online encoding a little easier, so we might not do open captions in the future. And this is something that you should just have, which is a monitor to monitor your captions. You know, it's important to be able to, someplace during your production, be able to see those captions, just see if maybe you scheduled it wrong and you find out all of a sudden, hey, there's no more captions. So, you know, you should have something like that. And I think it's good to monitor them on the way back from the providers. You know, it's good to have a residential set and see the RCN or the Comcast captions. We actually, we had, when we first started doing captions, we went through all the workflow changes and we got our captions all solid all the way out to Comcast, and then we realized we weren't seeing them on the residential on Comcast. And we called them and we worked it out over a few days and weeks, and it was, there was some encoder settings they had to change at their head end to accept our captions. So I said, that's great and that's good. And then we were all comfortable with that. And then a few weeks later, we decided to check RCN. We realized RCN didn't have captions either. So we talked to them, and, you know, of course, they said, it was probably on our end, and we worked it out, and that was all set. And then Comcast changed some head-end electronics, and then we had no captions in Comcast again. So it's just a constant battle. You always have to be watching your captions if you decide to do something. Another workflow thing that happened with us is we do long meetings, like up to 4 hours. And am I out of time yet?
Look, just
Finish this
another
one.
minute, Dennis.
We had long meetings up to, say, 4 hours, and there was a half an hour break in the middle of those meetings. So, and everything worked fine with the captions. We switched off caption operators. But at some point after the meeting was over, people decided, some of the guys said, we should cut out the intermission. They had a half an hour intermission, so we should cut out the intermission because it's just a slate that says intermission, which was a good idea. And they brought it into our Avid system. They brought it in, they cut the captions out, they cut the 30 minutes out, and then they sent the video off to our regular workflow. And then one day we're looking through some of those edited ones, say, isn't this great the way we don't have that 30 minutes, and the captions are gone. Because bringing it in post-production, into the Avid system, it strips out the captions. We were able to do it later with Premiere, but you just always have to be watching for them. And there's a quick thing about some of the stuff we learned. Good audio to the caption is very important. We have some environments, some meeting rooms that people won't talk into the microphones. We had to improve the audio system because the caption is, you're paying all this money for captioning, and they can't understand what you're saying, and they're typing, we would like to inaudible, blah, blah, inaudible. So,
Wait, and that's not just because they're from Boston?
Ouch. Ouch. Wow. No, please, as the moderator of this discussion, I have to ask that we keep
I'm an honorary Texan.
Yeah,
I'm not.
yeah. He's an honorary, that's a Texas accent. That's a Northeast Texas accent. Come on. He's an honorary Texan. Go ahead.
So test button on your encoder is very helpful. Not all the manufacturers have them. One of the particular encoders we have has it. And what that means is when you have a problem with captioning, you have to keep testing it. You don't want to have to keep calling your caption operator and try to schedule a test. They do a test. It's not working. You can't keep them on the line. So a test button is very helpful. We keep the vital information available in our master control room, so the guys that are kind of running the meeting, if something goes wrong, they have. The captioners usually call in and do a quick test before the meeting, so we try to grab their number. So if something goes wrong in the middle, we can call them back. Or if the captioners say, I'm trying to get ready for your meeting and I can't dial in, we keep the numbers so they can just quickly tell them these are our numbers, and like, oh, I was trying other numbers. Caption placement can be a consideration. We have different HD and SD meetings, so we have to have the captioners move the location. We use a document to track the scheduling, and that's simple. Two events at the same time, these two encoders. And like I talked about, you have to check your captions often all the way through your whole workflow.
Can I ask, on the placement of the captions, is that determined by the captioner or the cable system or the programmer?
Terry?
It's the captioner. So, the TV stations can tell us we want it in the middle or top or bottom, and then most of them leave it to our discretion to move when something comes up on the screen.
So from a like a production standpoint, you have to think about how the screen will
Lower
look,
thirds, yep.
how the lower third looks, how your framing looks for the event,
Right.
and then where those captions lie as they progress during the course of the production,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So it's all part of the sort of mise en scène that you're thinking about, right?
Yep.
Yeah, all right. Mise en scène.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. So we've rifled through a lot of information in 45 minutes. Let's get to some questions from you. So please come up to the microphone, and so everyone can hear you, because I know you guys are very shy.
Yeah,
And then introduce yourself in case people
Mike
don't know.
Reardon, City of St.
Yep.
Paul. Several very good information, and I'm going to look towards the captioners more. You were talking basically about meeting coverage, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so we really haven't gotten into talking about the videos that we produce and captioning them. We're just talking right now about meetings. So
Right.
approximately how much do you pay somebody to do the actual captioning, or how much do you charge, if you don't mind my asking, or ballpark?
Well, I don't do post-production.
I'm talking about
Okay.
meetings.
Oh, meetings.
Meetings.
So we charge a little bit less for government agencies, but I'll give you kind of like a ballpark. Is from 100 to 130 an hour.
Okay. And we've done a survey. Of providers that work with government entities. Depending on the type of contract, the cost can go down the lowest I've seen it is about $85, $87 a finished hour But that's based upon a large contract. That's a bulk purchase type of contract. So the
So-
price that Terry is talking about, I think, is a common price that you see
Yeah.
So-
across
so
the
we-
Well,
country.
we pay around.
And so
100 to
Dennis,
100.
you use an outside agency for your
Yes,
captioning?
we use all live captioners, just like Terry.
And approximately how much does that cost you a year?
We use a couple different ones, because I have so many meetings going on for availability, so we're paying between 100 and 150, I think.
So for
Per
our,
hour, per hour for every meeting, so 4-hour meetings, $600.
Sure.
so we have about 360 hours of programming a year. Our contract rate is $80 for English, 85 for Spanish, 135
Wow.
for a translation from English to Spanish or Spanish to English. So we also, what I neglected to show you at the beginning of that clip is that we told people that you could get the English captions on CC1, you could get the Spanish captions on CC3. We have looked at, for most of our council meetings, we will provide captioning in both English and Spanish. For all of our Spanish language, we will provide captions in Spanish. But under Maryland law and as part of negotiation, anybody else in the region or the state or nonprofits in the state can leverage our contract. So one of the things to look at, particularly if you can negotiate bulk volume, is the fact that it's not just my channel that may use that contract, but several other ones in the region. Or if you have, like, let's say Boston has one and they negotiated good contract pricing, and then all of the small towns and other P providers that are there that can leverage the fact that Boston was going to do a lot and get that lower rate.
And then our discussion has mostly been about the live caption context. We haven't really been talking about post-production captioning. My general sense is that the labor costs there are primarily for the time it takes to generate an accurate transcript first. And then the post-editing placement of that transcript in terms of a text file in Adobe Premiere or whatever the platform that you're using. So there's coordination and timing of the flow of those that adds more staff time into the post-production process. But frankly, it's that generation of the transcript is the major cost that I've seen. So that's I think a place where we may actually be seeing there might be some advances happening for
I would hope
translation
so.
services.
Yeah.
And we've done a couple, and we've used YouTube, but they're short ones, and then we go back and make that's the good first draft, and then we correct it after that.
That's a common DIY practice. For everyone who doesn't know what Mike's talking about, if you send a video up to YouTube and you turn captioning on, you can extract text out that they will provide on all of their video. But that's going to be about 80% accurate, to get back to Terry's point. And
less.
80% of an
Probably
English
less
language
on
sentence is,
Right.
it's garbled. So it doesn't absent yourself from labor.
Yeah.
But it's a great DIY type of setup for post-production editors to be working on, frankly, if you've got them working in an environment. The only thing I just sort of would caution is that they should know about those accuracy and placement issues that Terry brings up, just to know about sort of pacing and use of captions, because that's a huge issue for users.
And the YouTube auto captioning is not a voice writer doing that, it's just Google, YouTube
Yes,
trying to,
it's
yeah.
machine translation.
So that, I think, is pretty far below 80%.
Yeah.
You can see a lot of errors.
Yeah,
I've seen
but-
a lot of errors. So if it might be okay for some places to put up a video and then go back and caption. And I don't know if you can do that live, but you can go back and edit it and fix all these mistakes. But it might be somewhat of a liability to have those mistakes ever be up there.
Yeah,
right?
I'm not sure about the liability question. The other question that's coming up too is that there are translation services that journalists are looking at to be able to take video and then do transcripts, mostly news services that are looking to generate transcripts. So like the BBC is looking at a service that would be a subscription service that would drive the cost of generating a transcript down to about $10 an hour, which would be huge if they could get it to that type of accuracy that you need.
Right. I think there's also a lot of overseas transcription companies nowadays too that do it very low. Sorry.
Jody, is this audience Q&A or is this panel Q&A?
So we're just trying to give you the fullness of a response. Go ahead, Mike.
Michael, thank you. Thank all of you actually for a great presentation. I really appreciate it. I had a question for Mitzi, and then a separate question, actually, to anyone who wants to take a shot at it. One, Mitzi, before I start, just a comment. Will Montgomery stop setting the bar so high so the rest of us can achieve some measure of success? We would like that. I'd like you to talk a little bit about the pricing when you're doing captioning in 2 languages, and if you have a sense of it, logistically, how you present it. Because it seemed to me that each one would need its own encoder and its own pathway, but I might be mistaken in the way I'm thinking about it.
Is Donna Keating still in the room?
Yeah, Donna Keating is the expert on this.
Do we need 2 encoders?
Yes.
We do have 2 encoders, okay. So, so first let me also say that in Montgomery County, the way that we've set it up is that there are 3 municipalities within the county, and they have their own stations, and there are 4 stations that serve the county. The county station has 99.5% of its content is captioned, but our college channel, our schools channel have only maybe 40 hours or so that we're captioning, and they're trying to grow that, and our public station has hardly anything captioned. So we are continuing to try to move that bar, and to some extent getting support from community groups who come in and say, I'm really thankful that you provided that captioning because it really enabled me to see this. The fact that we have a cluster of deaf students at one of our high schools, and so they raised an issue about some of the programming that they were creating or that was being done on the school's channel that they couldn't access, and so that kind of helped moved it up a little bit. So I think it's really important, and I cannot overstate enough the value of making inroads with your older adult population. And some of these folks on the closed captionings, I mean, the normal captions would be about this big, and they've used the font. So the actual group of people who have both like deaf, blind issues is big. So for that one, on the cost, I mean, it has been, as most people in here know, you've had a recession, you've had certain things. We did actively seek to keep that funding for closed captioning, and there was a lot of pressure at one point in eliminating costs, in part because we felt that if you got rid of it, it would be much harder to bring it back as opposed to expanding it. We leveraged, to a certain extent, the county. The DOJ just went after every government, and they just started showing up and inspecting your facilities to see if you have doors that are able to be opened, and you have ramps, and you have signs, and all that kind of stuff. And we just sort of said, look, it's out there. Nobody's looking at it right now, but they're peeking under the bed covers for everything else. So, we should stay ahead of that. And we leveraged that at one point. We did, I think, have plans that we had wanted to expand the closed captioning, but for budget reasons, we were not able to do it beyond what we have right now, which is primarily the weekly council meeting, and then anything that's in Spanish is happening. We did get the equipment, but the upside of when you get the equipment is you have it available and you can use it. If you have something that may occur simultaneously, you can use it. So you can try to leverage for other things. And then ultimately, one of the things that I think we would like to try to do is, from our discussions, particularly with Spanish, people who watch Spanish language programs tend to watch a Spanish language channel. They do not switch to watch, you've shoved at 12:30, there's a program in Spanish, right? Let me switch over to watch it, right? So one of the things that you can do is to take and aggregate among these many channels, is to take all of our Spanish language production content. We had council members who were particularly interested in it, so we had some more production services for people who would be able to produce things in Spanish. And then you can sort of aggregate that, and then you can supplement it with your English language programs, in which you have the captions either appear as open or closed on the screen, so that suddenly I now have a lot of other things that are of interest to the public that I can put onto there. And kudos to Donna for renegotiating that contract to get that rate for the translation down to 135. And we're sort of continually looking at it. What has been interesting to us is we have Gallaudet University, which is the largest university for the deaf and hard of hearing community in the U.S. But there's not a lot of new job creation coming out of folks who may be affiliated with it or sort of learning to do more captioning. So that's just kind of as a job creation thing. You have WGBH in Boston, you know, and they're big on it. So that would be just another area I think that there's a big economic development, job creation opportunity for us as well that we ought to be thinking of how do we, you know, link those together because they can be good jobs.
Thank you. And my follow-up question is a little bit unrelated, but, and you may have touched on it, but it is a different constituency, and I just wonder about it, and I think no one in the room from the DOJ, so I'll ask the question. But
No.
for the community that has sight issues, the blind, often there is descriptive audio available. Why hasn't that become an issue? I mean, I'm just wondering about speculating on why that has not been raised as an issue under ADA.
There is discussion happening at the FCC regarding descriptive audio services that typically is in a separate docket than the captioning services. So it's not that it's not happening, it's currently happening. I think part of the issue is the number of consumers is much lower. So there's less of a perceived market is one of the issues. I don't know, Terry, do you have any thoughts on this?
My only thought would be that would be some pretty boring audio description during a city council meeting.
So
The representative
so
goes to the
Right.
microphone.
can I actually, can you just pull up my slide deck for a minute in the back? So one thing about that is, yes, depending on, I think that in looking at it, there was a certain amount of discussion of like for council meetings, you know, I mean, they tend to actually say in the council meeting who's speaking, you don't have to have a lot of direction.
Right.
Can you just go to anyone with a picture? Actually go to the last page is fine. There you
Hey.
go. Okay, so you notice on the bottom of these that I added the descriptors for those pictures. And that's in part because if you have a text reader, it can't read the image, but it can read the caption. The other thing that we've tried to do is to direct our producers. Let's say I'm at Brookside Garden. The producer can simply say, and we're walking outside to see your butterfly collection. And I've now, basically without having to do anything else, done exactly what audio description does for you. So that's just another thing that you can tell your producers, if you're doing something that is particularly visual, to just build those things into your script or what you do, and that can help address your problem.
And the other thing I would say on audio description is that those services are more expensive than captioning. So my general sense is that those exemption qualifications that exist within the FCC's
no idea.
captioning rules could, you know, very well pertain. But it's a separate set of discussions. I can't speak to it. So.
Hi, great panel today. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'm Mark Rosenberg with the City of Las Vegas. My question is, I have two questions. One, you said you produced 95% of your programming with closed captioning?
Yes,
And
we actually produce all of ours, but sometimes we get like some videos from the Veterans Administration.
Right.
Most of our stations as well, if like our educational stations, if they are buying like how to do algebra type videos or things, they buy the ones that have closed captions. And we had that discussion about live. We use the live captioning for the live meetings. And then for our recorded things, we basically play them to the captioner as if it was like at a live meeting.
Right.
So you're still only paying at the rate of the live captioning. I'm not sure if we may provide to them spellings for, like we have a very large African immigrant community, and there's a lot of vowel and combos that are unfamiliar, and
Right.
they have very different ways that they sound. So I think, oh, Donna, can you?
We ask our producers to provide information to the captioners so that if there's an unusual spelling or something, they will have it. And we do have dictionaries, as you mentioned, because we have some streets that are named, the spelling is different, so.
What is your annual budget for closed captioning?
Donna,
Approximately.
Donna, do you want to come to the microphone? Yeah. Donna can speak to this, I think, more directly.
This is Donna Keating. She is the production manager for County Cable Montgomery. And she also sits, Montgomery County has a PEG governance board where the 7 different entities meet monthly.
So we spend about 60,000 with our captioner. And then for our phone lines, it's about roughly $1,000, a little less, dollars per month. And just quickly, to speak to your issue around audio description, our rate for that is $2,400. We do have a rate. And we have been approached
Yeah, it's
to
crazy.
at
number.
least start the
jobs.
conversation around audio description
That required
services.
no skill.
So, but that is cost prohibitive
That
for
is-
Montgomery
yeah.
County.
And can we edit the files that come?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's $2,400 per hour. It's
hour.
a, yeah.
So Donna, can we edit the closed caption files that we get? Can we do any editing in those once we receive them back?
Shannon does that,
There you
yes,
go.
so.
So,
No, 60.
$60,000 a year.
$60,000 is what they,
It's about 1,000 roughly for the phone charge per month. In addition to. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so basically what we're saying is that it's about $72,000 that we're spending. That channel has a budget of slightly over $2 million.
How many hours of original programming does that account for between meetings and your post-produced programs?
360?
Yeah, that's
About
about right.
360.
And most of it is meetings, you know, our council members.
I mean, Fairfax County produces 900 hours of original programming a year.
Yeah.
500 of those is meetings, so about half and half. And we have a $60,000 volunteer closed captioning cost.
Yeah.
So that's for both first produced and meetings. We do board supervisors, planning commission members, and so a lot of meetings.
It's a lot of meetings, and Mitzi's right. We believe we save a lot of money with that, using as we're ingesting things into our server, because sending it out, and also from a timely issue, as opposed to sending it out and it takes 3-4 days for it to return, so.
Mark, does that get to your question?
Yes,
or do you have a?
that did my first question.
All right.
Sorry,
Okay.
I have one more
We'll just
question.
bring everybody
Sure.
up
One
to-
question,
yeah, right,
one more
yeah.
question. So after we're required by the FCC to go online and put in our information, can you give us an idea of what you think might happen after that?
So my sense is that if a consumer complaint, let's say a consumer in the city of Las Vegas has an issue with your channel, right now they're making complaints to the cable company or the FCC, and there's no one to talk to. You'll be CC'd within, I think it's within 30 days of a complaint getting to either the cable company or the FCC. If the FCC has a question about your self-certification, because this is you saying I'm exempt or I'm not exempt. If they have a question about the status of your exemption, they're going to reach out to you upon the basis of a complaint, probably, as opposed to there's not a guy sitting there going through a directory looking to call you up, because they don't have the time to do that, frankly. And my general sense is that it would be in cases where there are large entities where there's more of a question of the exemption. One of the issues that we found as Natola and ACM were hosting the closed captioning workshop last fall at the FCC headquarters is that many of the staff don't understand our industry at all. So part of the issue that we need to be doing is educating them just about the realities of the situation and what it means for your community. So if there was a question about your exemption status, the FCC would reach out to the point of contact as well. And then the FCC or the cable provider would reply to that complaint saying, oh, this is an exempt channel. And you'd have the opportunity to respond as well to the constituent in your community. So that's how they're envisioning the process. Oh, come on, there's got to be another question. Jody.
I just want to thank you because we've had several webinars and presentations and workshops on the rules, what's coming with both the DOJ and the FCC, budget issues and things like that. We really wanted this session to take it one next step further and talk more about operation and even signal flow and how it technically works. So you nailed it. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. I promised you get out of here by 5:30, so we still have some time for some more questions if you want. Come on up, come on up and introduce yourself.
One question would be Dan Bach with the City of Garland, Texas. How would you define the budget or revenue for the channel? Because our PEG channel really doesn't have a budget. We're all part of public media relations, and it's.
So do you work for the city?
I do.
Okay, so, and this again, somebody who spends more time in this as a legal opinion can go ahead and look at that, but my guess is that they will come and they will look at the budget for the whole city.
Okay. Well, that's.
I
So-
mean, if you're, so let's say you're a P operation and you're just getting funding either from the city or you're getting funding through the cable operator directly. I would argue that in that case that it's almost the same, because the reason why you get the money from the cable operator is because the city negotiated that in their
So,
your issue.
and I would just ask you for a moment for the channel operations themselves that you do with the city. Do you break them out in a sub budget anywhere?
Not really.
Huh.
With what we these days, the channel is almost an afterthought. It's there for live meetings and that sort of thing. These days, a lot of our emphasis is actually pushing to social media and other sources for our work.
So I would suggest it might be in your interest to be looking at what the revenue for the channel is and defining that somehow through your budgeting process.
It's like zero revenue from the channel.
Say what?
There'd be zero revenue for the channel.
Well,
but-
so the revenue is really, it's the, what's the operation cost? What's
Cost of
the
it.
income? What are we sort of
Right.
spending on that? And I mean, I'm just want to clarify one point there. Under the FCC rules, if per channel, the operating budget is less than 3 million, you could qualify for an exemption. But under the ADA and effective communications,
Right.
for that economic burden, that is where the overall revenue of the city is likely to come into play.
Which is several $100 million a year.
Right. So I think I would have to have a better sense of what the operations look like. My sense is you probably are exempt under the FCC rules, but this question probably needs to be addressed within the city.
Right.
And you need to probably do an analysis of what it could cost you, and then determine whether or not that's a burden for you, and it's an unreasonable burden, because that ends up being the question. Reasonable accommodations are really the thought process within the ADA. No one's asking somebody to defund programming to be able to make an accommodation. The question is what's reasonable. And so it's in your best interest, and it's in the city's best interest to make an analysis of what that could look like, even if you may not be like figuring out to do it right away. Because you need to have that type of data to be able to make a case under ADA, because it's your government's responsibility to the citizens that you serve.
Right. And I know it's something we're going to need to do.
Yeah, you need to do it.
Do it eventually.
Right.
We're just hoping for technology or some way to.
And there's one other question on this. Some people have asked whether or not if you step your toes into this and start doing live captioning and you're an exempt channel, does that somehow create a liability shadow? And my sense is that it doesn't. If you start doing captioning services, it's actually a good thing, even though you are an exempt. So you can be transmitting captions even if you are an exempt channel. It doesn't create some sort of burden suddenly.
Because at this point, we already caption our local programs. We'll just run through movie capture and hammer it out. Of course, a lot of the stuff we do is only 2-3 minutes, but when you start dealing with 5 or 6 hours of sometimes live meetings, which you have no idea how many hours these people are going to go.
That's right. But and I would just say as a budget thing as well, is that if you look to calculate out what's the total amount of time that all the people who are doing the production, all the council members, this is what it's costing us to put that meeting out there. So the minor cost of adding, somewhere around $100 an hour.
Right.
If you look in the scheme of things, and then just talking about like how many people it makes it more accessible to.
So we're out of time. If you want to talk with people after the fact, please do. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. We'll see you later on, I hope, at the Google Fiber reception, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much, everybody.